If you would, Fred, would you please tell us your name, birth date, and place?
Fred Voss, spelled V-O-S-S. Birth date is April 12th, 1920. I was born in Aachen, A-A-C-H-E-N, West Germany. Aachen is a border town on the Belgium-Dutch border. Before the war, we used to cross the border just hopping in a streetcar, and the streetcar was taking us into Belgium and into Holland. So that's a very famous corner. They call it three-country look.
Mm-hmm.
You've got three countries you can oversee the border.
How old were you then when Hitler became Chancellor?
Hitler became Chancellor on January 30th, 1933, and since I was born in 1920, I was 13 years old.
And who lived in your family household?
At that time, my mother and dad, my brother, who was 7 years older than myself, and my grandmother, who was my mother's mother. And the house that I was born in belonged originally to my grandfather's grandfather. And my mom was born in the same house. Those days, he had midwives, he had no hospitals, at least not in this part of Germany where I come from. And it was a family house where we all lived in and born and died in.
And did your father have his business there?
My dad, who lived in this house before my mom got married, they were butchers, and he had this butcher shop in this house. And my grandfather died very young when he was 45 years old. He died on pneumonia in 1901, because in 1901 there was no cure. When he had pneumonia, that was it. So he got pneumonia and died at the age of 45, and left my grandmother with 3 little children. And my grandmother continued the butcher shop, and then when my mother got married, she retired, and my dad bought the house of my grandmother, and she continued to live with us, of course, and he changed it from a butcher store into a textile store.
Mm-hmm. What did he sell in his store?
They sold all kinds of textiles, from bed sheets to work clothes to handkerchiefs. Dad, you have to go back. Those days in Germany, there used to be a lot of peddlers. They used to go from house to house, and especially in the countryside where there were no stores. And Dad had all those peddlers as his customers. So he finally went into the wholesale business. And the peddlers were the ones that came and bought the merchandise. And some of those people went on their bicycles, they had the pack on the back of the bicycles, and they went on their farms, from one farm to the other. You know, you see the movies, if you remember the San Francisco Kid, for instance, where the old peddler goes around. That was the type of business that they did.
Was he a wholesaler then when Hitler came to power?
Yes, that business had flourished over the year, and he was doing very well. We had one store in this particular building and another one across the border in Holland.
Okay.
So that was done in Holland because the duties in Holland were less expensive than they were in Germany. So by delivering the goods in Holland, the Dutch would get a reduction in duties those days.
Mm-hmm.
So an item that would have cost X mark in Germany was X minus 10% in Holland. So it was really great business those days.
So individuals who wanted to purchase goods didn't come into your father's store?
No.
Okay.
Not later on in years. In the beginning, yes, but not later on in years. No,
Mm-hmm.
It was strictly wholesale.
Mm-hmm. Um, how would you describe your relationship with your parents, your brother, your grandmother, your friends?
At which level? When?
Before 1933.
Okay. A very close-knit family relationship. We were a very, very large family. My mom had one sister and one brother who died also very young. And my dad was the youngest of 6 siblings. And there were numerous uncles and aunts and dozens of cousins. And it was a very large family. The family got together at family festivities. 50, 60 people would show up, and they were just all family. And very close-knit family. Very, very close-knit.
Your brother was 7 years older than you.
Yes.
Yeah. So what was he doing at the time that right before the Nazis came to power?
My brother was at that time 20 years old, and he was in college, and he was able to finish college, and he had a degree in merchandising, which was a business college that he was in. I don't think we have such a college in the United States at all. It was a different era, different time. He got a degree in business management, and business was a business degree, MBM degree, something like an MBM degree maybe here, all right? And from there he went as a intern into a very large department store, and he served for about a year as an intern, and we now have 1935. And at that point the store that he was doing his internship in had decided that they didn't want any more Jewish employees, and he was discharged from the store.
Was that before or after the Nuremberg laws?
1935. That was before
before the fall.
Wide.
Yeah.
Wide.
What was the name of the store?
Gebrüder Kaufmann, Brothers Kaufmann. Kaufmann Brothers Incorporated in the English. And it was huge department store. And he had hoped, prior to Hitler, he had hoped that he would become a department manager there or something like that.
What did he do then after he lost his position?
Okay, after he lost his position, he first went to Holland to take care of my father's business store in Holland. And then at the end of 1935, he was arrested by the Gestapo on a framed-up charge that he had distributed anti-Hitler literature, in which he was never involved. My father got him out because the Gestapo let him out. My dad had, I forgot the figure, it was like something like 5,000 or 10,000 German marks, which was a lot of money, which was the fine that my father had to pay. And that resulted in that after he got out of jail, he immediately, I have to go back again into history, my grandmother was the youngest of 13 children. And my grandmother had 12 brothers, and she was the only girl. And they had all left Germany in the early 1900s, late 1800s. I mean, yeah, because she was born in 1857 and she was the youngest. And they had all left Germany because they did not want to serve in the Prussian army. And they all left for the United States, which was easy those days. You hopped in the boat and you came to the United States, and they all settled in San Francisco. As a matter of fact, one of her brothers was killed in the 1907 earthquake in San Francisco. And another brother became a very big merchant, and one brother, I don't know, one brother worked on a ship, like a stevedore, and he traveled the 7 seas. And also the cousins had left Germany for the same reason. Among them, a cousin with the name of Sutro, who became the mayor of San Francisco. And today yet, there is the Sutro Park in San Francisco named after him. So to come back to the question, I haven't forgotten the question. So to come back to the question, my brother had written a letter, or my dad did, or my mother, I don't remember, had written a letter to San Francisco, to one of the brothers, and said, hey, get Ed out of Germany, try to get him a visa to come to the United States, because he got very innocent into trouble for distributing anti-Hitler leaflets, which he had not done, which was a frame-up. And they immediately, it was even then in 1935, that was the end by 1935, it was very easy to come to the United States, and yet the quota system, but nobody was leaving. So they sent whatever paper they needed, just sent it to the American consul in Stuttgart, and my brother went to Stuttgart, and he got his visa stamped and his passport, and he left from Rotterdam on a freighter and went to San Francisco. The journey took 41 days. Because it was a freighter which stopped 94 times before it finally got to San Francisco. So he got to San Francisco, and which was good, because the Nazis would have arrested him again on some trumped-up charge, because he was very active in the 1932, when he was about 19, 20 years old, in college. He was very, very active against the Nazis. He had aligned himself with the Christian Socialist Party, and they were fighting the Nazis those days, including street fights, in which he of course never was. But he was politically very active, and like college students are, all right? So that's where the Gestapo evidently got his name and figured, we're going to get you, boy. Just sooner or later we're going to get you. They got him, all right? It was definitely a trumped-up charge.
Did your brother ever talk to you about what it was like to be imprisoned by the Gestapo?
Interrogation.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes from 6 o'clock in the morning until midnight, without getting any food, without getting anything, or any drinks. He was totally in jail, I think, for about 10 days. Mm-hmm. And they find after 10 days, after my father paid the 10,000, I don't forgot the figure, 5,000, 10,000, that doesn't count. Mm-hmm. So.
What was your father's response to your older brother's incarceration?
Well, frustrated, because he knew it was a trumped-up charge. We all knew that. So the question was how to get him out. Mm-hmm. So.
How would you describe your upbringing generally in terms of religious practice, political views?
In Germany at that time?
In Germany at that time.
Extremely liberal as far as religion was concerned. Mm-hmm. My parents were extremely liberal people. They believed in live and let live. Okay? And that was our upbringing. Live and let live. Tolerance. Those days already, my parents used to preach to us as children that we have to be tolerant to all human beings. So we were brought up that way, with the tolerance taught us. And religious-wise, very liberal.
Did you belong to a Reformed synagogue then?
Yes. I was a Reformed synagogue, like most German Jewish temples.
Right.
Well, you had two things. Either you had the ultra-Orthodox, like in Frankfurt and Maine, for instance, where they were really Orthodox, or the rest of the temples, they had organs. We had a choir, where mostly Christians were singing in the choir. We had, no one ever wore a prayer shawl. And those days the men wore top hats to services. That was also the Christian churches Christians went in top hat. They took them off, of course, but the Jews left them on. But that was the dress code here. Whether you went to temple or synagogue or church, you carried the top hat. It was a status symbol. So that's what everybody did.
What about political views? You spoke about your brother. What about, did you have any sense of political or your father?
No, not really. No, not really. Well, one thing was sure. Don't forget, my father was in the First World War. And when he came out of the army, these people felt German. They felt German first and Jewish second. Okay? And my father was on the firm belief that nothing ever would happen to him because he had the Iron Cross. He had what we call here the Purple Heart. He was wounded in France. He felt 100% German. So therefore, his father was a volunteer in the 1870-71 Prussian-Franco War. So they felt as German can be. My grandfather was, I remember his story, was a very strong supporter of Bismarck, for instance. He thought the world fell and rose on Bismarck. But Bismarck, I remember his story, studying out was a great, okay. My grandmother, my mom's mother, wore a brooch with Frederick the Great. That was her idol. All right? That's how Germanized these people were. Frederick the Great was, and that's how I got my name, by the way, Fred, believe it or not. Because my grandmother had something to say about it, I guess. But Frederick the Great was the idol of my grandmother. So how much more German can you feel? How much more German can you be, right? These people would have never believed. They would have said you're insane if you would have told them what would happen. They would have said you're insane.
So when your brother was arrested by the Gestapo, your father just thought it was kind of this insane act and that
Exactly.
things would get better.
Oh, absolutely. You know the story, I've talked about that often. My father was in Buchenwald and he came out of the concentration camp and the Nazis gave him 30 days to leave Germany and he refused to go because he thought the Nazis would last another 30 days.
What was your schooling like before 1933?
Well, I went to a Jewish religious school for the first 4 years, from my 6th to my 10th, which was custom those days. The parochial schools, Christian kids went to the Christian school, the Jewish kids to the Jewish schools. Also, as a toddler, I went to a Christian kindergarten with the nuns. So I was indoctrinated into praying for Jesus and what have you, because the nuns on the but nobody gave it a second thought. It was accepted. It was integrated. It was accepted. Mm-hmm. And I went for the first year to a Jewish day school, and from there I went to 10 years. You go to what? You go to 4th grade in public school system. And I was in the public school system until 1936, until I was told that I no longer could go to school.
Did you get a sense before 1933 that of any discrimination against you because you were a Jew?
No.
Or a sense of racism?
I had one Jewish friend and maybe 10 Christian friends. Mm-hmm. No, never.
These were children that you met in your neighborhood then?
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
Yeah. Children from school, still kids that lived in the neighborhood that we played with. Never, ever was there any discrimination. Mm-hmm. None.
What did you have any sense of who the Nazis were before 1933?
No, none at all.
Yeah.
None at all.
Did you ever talk politics in your family's household?
Not before Hitler.
No.
Never heard it before Hitler. Not a word.
Mm.
Not a word. This came after Hitler.
I was wondering, Fred, if you could tell me, what was your family's perception of the Nazis and their rise to power?
That's a very, very interesting question. My family, like most people in Germany, at that time did not believe that Hitler would ever get into power. Don't forget now, you probably know the statistic better than I forgot what the statistic were. I think in 1931, Hitler only had about 7% of the Germans, of the German vote, something like that. 1932, he jumped from 7 to 15%, and in 1933, he won the Reichstag. He had the majority. So, and everyone thought, especially the Jews, that he would live long to see his dreams come true, because politics was changing continuously in Germany. I don't know the number of chancellors that they had, but there was one chancellor following the other. So Hitler was another chancellor, and he too shall pass. He will be history before too long, you know. I remember my father's words: let him come into power, let him come, let him get it over with, and then we'll see. He won't last long. Nobody believed what was to come.
When did you get a sense that Hitler was going to be more than a temporary phenomenon?
Well, the first sense came to us when the Reichstag burned in 1933. And the majority of the people knew that the charges were trumped up charges. They found this poor innocent Dutchman, Wanderlooper, who was a guy had a mental problem. They found him. The SS put the Reichstag in flames, put Wanderlooper, we know that, put Wanderlooper outside the Reichstag when the Reichstag was burning, and arrested him and said there was a conspiracy, and that gave Hitler the total power as a dictator that he was looking for. All right? That was number one, when we knew, hey, wait a minute, this guy is worse than we thought he was. Then when Hindenburg, who was the German president, Feldmarschall von Hindenburg, who was a German hero, he was the Eisenhower of the 1914, 1918 days, because he had beaten the Russians on the East Front. And Hindenburg was the president, and when Hindenburg died, Hitler took immediately the position of president and chancellor, and then eventually the name of Führer. So at that time he had total control, and everybody knew we now lived in a dictatorship. People were already arrested in 1933. They already were sent to the first concentration camps. One was Sachsenhausen, outside of Berlin, and people disappeared. And now we began to realize, hey, we are dealing with a maniac here.
Did you have discussions amongst your family members about the Nazis, or any feelings? Or
No, not in those days, not 1933, because they were a non-entity as far as we were concerned. All right? They were total non-entity. And they're here today and gone tomorrow, right? So in addition to this, at that point we lived in the Rhineland, which was a different story. The Rhineland was a demilitarized zone which the Germans had given up after the Versailles Treaty of 1918. And also the Gestapo was in the Rhineland and the Nazi Party was in the Rhineland. But those days, talking about 1933, 1934, there was no German army as such, because under the Versailles Treaty the Germans couldn't have an army. So what happened that, what was it, 1935 when Hitler finally, officially, 34, 35, not in 33, I think it was 34, 35, when he got the German army into power, 36, whatever it was. And the very, very first thing that he did is he marched into the Rhineland. All right? And when he marched into the Rhineland, we knew what was going on, and we were hoping that the British and the French and the Belgian, who had guaranteed that the Rhineland would be demilitarized, would march in. And they failed us. Had the French and the British at that time moved in like they were supposed to do, Hitler would have been finished. Instead of that, they backed down, and the German people now saw in Hitler, hey, look what he has done. All right? He doesn't give a damn about the British, and he brings us back to our glory. And that's exactly what happened. Yeah.
What experiences did you have in between 1933 and 1937 with the Nazis? More specifically, the April 1933 boycott,
Right.
Nuremberg laws, 35.
Well, the famous story I tell everybody is, in the Jewish religion, with the age of 13, a Jewish boy becomes a man, and a girl becomes a woman. Right? The bar mitzvah for boys, the bat mitzvah for girls. Today the bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs have become a celebration of like a wedding, okay? The catering business has been established, and we now have found whomever to make money on this. And now it has become a social standard, social status, you know. But those days it was strictly a religious affair. You had your religious service at the temple, and then you went home, and at home your parents had a buffet and the family was invited, and that was about all right? A lunch buffet, never a hotel, my God, no. And the biggest present a Jewish boy could get was a watch or fountain pen, okay? You didn't have ball pen, you know, the old fountain pens, in the ink. That was the biggest present a Jewish boy could get, and a watch. We came out of the temple, and we knew that there was a boycott, but we didn't know exactly what. And when we got to our house, there were two SR men standing in front of the house, and they were huge. And I'm always being asked, I don't remember, if there were yellow plaques with a black dot or black plaques with a yellow dot. I can't remember anymore. They were pasted on the windows, the store windows. And they carried signs with them, Germans don't buy from Jews. And as we walked in the house, they were very civilized as art. They walked away, you know, so we could walk in the house, didn't bother us, didn't disturb anybody. And the next day it was all over. It was a one-day boycott. The next day was all over. So that was that. But as time went on, the shenanigans started. Especially the teenagers, against the teenagers. We would be stopped, walking the streets, searched for weapons. That was the game. Search us for weapons. And we became the entertainment for the German populace. And, you know, We walked down the street, and all of a sudden some Gestapo agent would come and say, hey, come here, and put your arms up and frisk you. And in no time at all, you had a crowd of about 15, 20, 30 people. Imagine you walk down on any street here in the U.S., and a cop stops you, and you're a teenager, makes you raise up your arms in public, frisk you. Immediately you draw a crowd, right? And that became the entertainment for the German populace.
Did that happen to you?
Oh God, yeah, several times.
Yeah. How did you feel when that happened?
Dehumanized, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Terrible. You stick out like a sore thumb, all right? You feel like you wear the what is the X on your back, right? That's you feel like you've been branded.
Mm-hmm.
I remember other incidents where I was in a streetcar, and a man who knew that I was Jewish. He was in the SI uniform, and told me to get off the next stop. He didn't want to be with a Jew boy in the streetcar together.
How did the other people respond to that in the streetcar?
People were intimidated. Nobody would come to your rescue. Nobody. Because people were intimidated. People were afraid. People knew what was going on, but they were afraid. If they would come to your help, they'd be the next one. And there was no question about it. So people were scared. And that's the scare tactic is how they gain control. The scare tactic.
How did your father's business, how was it affected by
Interesting enough.
by the persecution?
Not at all.
Did he have primarily Jewish peddlers?
No, not at all. Not at all. Not at all. No, not at all. There were hardly any Jews who were peddlers.
Mm-hmm.
Hardly any. No, not at all. Dad was a very respected merchant,
Mm-hmm.
and even the competition respected my dad. And business did not suffer at all until, I would say, 1937. 1937 started because why? The banks had stopped giving any Jewish businessman credit. And whoever, these people worked with the banks. And they withdrew all the open credits. And that's when my parents' business, as well as other Jewish businesses, started to suffer. Because they now didn't have a credit line, and which by 1900, that's an interesting question that you asked me, which by 1938, I would say January or February 1938, had forced my parents to go into Chapter 11. Okay? Now, by the time Kristallnacht came by, the business was still there, but it had gone down tremendously because of people were afraid to come by now and all kind of things. Now, I'll tell you why it's an interesting question. After the war, when the restitution laws came about, my father had applied to the Germans for a restitution for loss of business because of persecution. And the new German, so-called new German government at that time, talking about 1948, 1949, had decided that my father would not qualify for any restitution for the business because his business had got into Chapter 11 before Kristallnacht. Okay? And consequently, he was turned down for any amount of restitution whatsoever. The fact how it came about bother them at all. That had nothing to do with the facts of life, you know. The facts were you went into chapter 11 with your business long before Kristallnacht, so therefore don't hide behind Kristallnacht. You have nothing to do. Forget about it, all right? Nothing to do with it. So that's how he got a small pension because he had been in the concentration camp, Buchenwald concentration camp for 3 months. A very, very small pension he got. He couldn't have lived on it, believe me. I forgot what it was, but he always used to say, thank God I can buy a bowl of soup with it. So he used to say that, you know, and that's about, of course it's exaggerated, but...
Did your father then not lose his non-Jewish clientele? His non-Jewish customers were willing to still do business with him?
Absolutely.
Until 37, 38?
No, right until Kristall.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was, again, you got to understand, which is very difficult for anyone to understand. We lived in the Rhineland. The Rhineland was predominantly Catholic, and that had a lot to do with it. The Catholics at those days felt persecuted as well. Okay? The Catholic clergy felt persecuted as well. So the Catholic populace was very sympathetic to the Jews. Very sympathetic to the Jews. And that was a big difference. I mean, no, in other parts of Germany things were worse. Much worse. Much worse. But the Catholic populace came basically to our defense as much as possible.
So your description, how would you describe then relations between Jews and non-Jews after the Nazi rise to power? How would you describe it?
The relationship failed. Again, as I said before, of fear. The boys that I went to school with all of a sudden appeared in Hitler uniforms, Hitler Youth uniforms. They all of a sudden became big shots. And hey, we don't want to know you anymore, because if we do know you, we're going to be in trouble. You speak to a Jew, hey, you're a Jew lover. Alright? So, we lost all our friends. In the middle of the some kids, the kids even turned against us. The adults were no different. My father's best friend was a man with whom he had served in the German army in World War I, who was, I'll never forget his name, Heinrich Schnoppenay. I'll tell you a funny story about Heinrich Schnoppenay. Very funny story. Heinrich Schnoppenay was born in the same little town where my dad was born. They were the best of friends. Heinrich Schnoppenay ran into tough times. He had, I don't know what kind of a business he had, but he had lost his business. And he had joined the Nazi party in the hope that he could, like many people, saw an opportunity, you know. And one of the things that he had sworn to, he would not deal with Jews. He would not talk to Jews. He consequently finished with my father's relationship. Wouldn't even look at my father. In 1944, shortly after the invasion, I was with the US Army in France. And I was a driver at that time. At that time I was not assigned to military government yet. I was an ammunition driver for a 6x6, the Army 6x6s. And it was our job to drive from, well, we had taken already, Paris was already taken in August. Yeah, it was around that time. after we took Paris. I was driving German prisoners to Cherbourg, and from there they were loaded on American ships to be prisoners of war in the United States. It's an interesting story. And as we brought the German prisoners in, they first had to unload the ships with the ammunition. The ships all carried ammunition. So we made the German prisoners unload the ships, and then when they were unloaded, they stayed on the ships and they went back to America. And Heinrich Knoppenay was one of the German prisoners. And he came to me, he saw me and he recognized me. And he said, "You know who I am?" I said, "Yeah, I know who you are. You're the guy who turned against my father at the end. You forgot who your friends were." And I let him go like this. I don't know what he expected me to do, but I wasn't about to do anything for him. I reciprocated his courtesy.
What about your mother's experience in comparison to your father's? Did she lose friends also? Or?
Yeah, very, very same thing. There was no difference.
Mm-hmm.
Mom lost her friends, yeah, very, very, very identical situation.
Mm-hmm.
Very identical to this. But the Jewish women kept on going, you know. They held the fort down. That's so interesting how the Jewish women really were put to the task to keep the family going, keep the children happy, keep the husbands happy, and what have you. But that's another story. That's another story.
Do you remember anything specifically about your mother's experiences in those terms? Did you get a sense that you saw your mother in a different light, or?
Yes, I think so. My mom before that was a very timid woman,
Mm-hmm.
and she rose to the challenge,
Mm-hmm.
and she became the boss, so to speak, really, because she knew that my mom had decided in the early stages that the family should leave Germany, but my dad didn't even want to hear about it. So, yes, it became a different life. Mom was pushing to get out of Germany. Dad insisted, "Hey, this is going to be over, you know. Just keep your cool, all right." So there was that friction between my mom and my dad. Absolutely refused to hear about it. Absolutely. Whereas Mom felt she wanted to bring the family into safety, and she was concerned about her mother, who was blind. She had cataracts on both eyes, and those days cataract surgery was almost impossible. Very few were successful, and besides that, the patient had to be in the hospital for 10 days to 2 weeks. So again, my mother really rose to the occasion after Kristallnacht, when my father was arrested, and now all of a sudden she had to dispose of the business, she had to dispose of the house, because of the restrictions that the Nazis had put on her in order to get my dad out of the concentration camp. And she really rose to that occasion. And I don't know how she did it. I really don't know how she did it. She arranged for everything, which was not an easy task. She was called down to the Gestapo headquarters several times, and she always said that she was treated with great courtesy, but firmly, but with great respect and great courtesy. Nobody ever touched her or put a hand on her or harmed her in any way.
What were your experiences specifically when the Nuremberg race laws came out in 1935? What were your feelings and
Well, I was
experiences?
15 years old, and the race laws did really not bother me personally, because with a boy who was 15 in 1935, the sexuality wasn't there like it is in today's age, all right? We were innocent boys, believe it or not. And girls were innocent as well at that age. This affected those who were older. Now, of course, it became the subject for trumped up charges. Many fellows, 17, 18 years old, were arrested on Rassenschande, which was the mixture of Aryan and non-Aryan sexual relationships. Okay? And the Nazis drummed that up to the hilt. And these people were arrested, their pictures in the newspaper, and many went to the concentration camps, many never came back. That was the beginning. I know of I don't know if he was related to my parents a lot, of a man who was in his 30s and was engaged to a Christian woman for getting married and was arrested under the Nuremberg laws, and we never saw him again. So, again, these topped up charges, there were, the famous stories is when we were not allowed to drive vehicles anymore. You were picked up for stopping a red light. That was enough to send you off to Buchenwald. So you became now an enemy of the people, but to go to the red light. Trumped up there's nothing you can do about a trumped up charge. It's like a cop arrests you in this country and puts a gun in your pocket and says, okay, I got you. You got a gun in your pocket. What are you going to do? You're helpless. And that's what they did. My uncle, I had an uncle who lived in Düsseldorf, was married to a Christian woman. They had no children. And broke up their marriage.
What were your parents' feelings, or what did they say about the Nuremberg race laws, if you recall anything about that?
It didn't really affect us. There was nothing that would affect our family directly.
So there wasn't a sense that something had fundamentally changed in the way the Nazis were treating Jews?
Well, we knew that it had changed, but again, it didn't affect it. Human beings, if it doesn't affect you personally, it's terrible, But if it affects you personally, my God, it's a major disaster. I always use it as a comparison. If somebody else's mother dies, it's terrible. If your mother dies, it's a tragedy. So, I always use that as an analogy. It didn't affect my family personally. And therefore the problem, I had no Christian girlfriends. My brother didn't, so.
What were your experiences in school?
Up to the time 1933, 1934, no problems. You see now, 1935 it changed. And changed tremendously by 1935. By mid-1935 and 1935, Jewish students were segregated from the Aryan students in the classrooms. We had to sit in the rear of the classrooms. We were not allowed to participate in sports. During lunchtime, when kids go in recess or on the playground, we were not allowed. We had to stay in class. All this little punishment, all this little picking, all make you stick up like to dehumanize you. All right, the Nazis tried to dehumanize us. I always say, pill by pill, one at a time, to make us feel less and less like human beings. So that part of. But gradually it got worse. It got worse to the point where no matter how bright a Jewish student was, no matter how well an essay was written, or no matter how well your test papers were, they were always marked failed. They were always marked failed. And later on I found out from a teacher why the school principals were ordered to tell the teachers, he's a Jew, he got to fail in every subject, I don't care what he does. The government wanted Jewish students, the Nazi government, to be prevented from entering German universities. If you fail in every subject, hey, no university takes you, right? A teacher, a German teacher, whom I met through Mr. Goethe, that I'm friendly with in Germany, told me, and by that time now when I met him, that was many years ago, he was an old man, I asked him the question, why? And he told me, he said, you want to know? I'll tell you why. It was done so that Jewish students could not enter a college or university. Even if they would go abroad, the transcript was a stigma against you. All right? Even if you went abroad and you wanted to, hey. And it goes back again, 1935, before the Nuremberg Laws, before Kristallnacht. Like my father's story, hey, he went to chapter 11 before Kristallnacht. So that was the same problem that they had. Then finally it got worse. One of my examples is that I always say was our music teacher that we had. He, Dr. Fleugels. I never forget the man. I tried to look him up when I was with the army in Germany, in the army in Aachen, but I couldn't find Dr. Fleugels. I would have brought him up on charges, but I couldn't find him. He would come in his SS uniform and made us stand at attention and made the rest of the class sing, when the Jewish blood spurts from the knife, we are better off twice as well, you know, the famous Nazi song. And he made the Jewish students stand at attention. Or we had another teacher, I don't know anymore what he taught. He had me stand up one day against the blackboard from the side, and he told the kids to look at all the features of a Jew so they would recognize a Jew. Now, how do you think I felt? I felt he could pick me up off the ground, you know, and slap me around. I would have felt, if somebody would have slapped me, I would have felt better. It's a hurt. It's a hurt. And it's something that makes you bitter. And that's probably where I got my life theory from about tolerance, from those days. Those days I will never forget, and I never want this to happen to another human being. And that's where it comes from.
How many classmates were Jewish in your class? How many of you were there? Do you remember?
Well, I think I have a picture here. Are you talking now about on public school, right?
Yeah.
Not that many, maybe about a half a dozen.
Mm-hmm. Go right ahead.
Maybe about I don't know what that is. But I have a picture here somewhere of my Jewish day school. Oh, it's not here. I don't know where. Oh, here it is. There's a picture here of my Jewish day school. I don't know if you can see this. Can you see it? Mm-hmm. And there's a total of, and I wrote underneath this here, this is one of the saddest pictures of my childhood. It shows 40 of my Jewish day school classmates taken in 1928. I was 8 years old. By the time the war was over, only 7 of us had survived the Holocaust. Can you believe this? 40 on the 7th of the September. It shows you the magnitude of the destruction. As far as the other Jewish students, I know only of 3 of us who survived. And I was one of the lucky 3. One kid went to Auschwitz. He was for 3 years in Buchenwald, another 3 years in Auschwitz. And he was finally liberated in Auschwitz by the Russians. And then wound up in East Germany, and it's a long story what he went through. So, but
did you ever tell your parents about what went on in school?
oh yeah, oh God, yeah. There was nothing they could do about it. Nothing they could do about it.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely not. Because if my father would have gone to the principal, they had a pat answer. Take him out of school. Take him out of school. Pat answer. We don't like it, lump it. We don't want it anyway. You don't want it anyway, so what are you bothering us about?
So how long were you in that school? What school was it? What was the name of the school?
It was called the Mittelschule.
Mm-hmm.
And I was between the gymnasium, what they call the German, you know, and upper class, the Jahrschule, okay,
Mm-hmm.
the terminologies. So I was there until 1936. That was it.
And then you were simply dismissed.
I was just one morning called to the principal office. We all were, and he told us to pack our bags and not to come back to school anymore.
How did that make you feel?
It made me feel good, believe it or not, because as far as I was concerned, I don't have to go. You know, we would leave the house every morning. We were scared to death. We didn't know what we were up against. All right? And we talked to our parents, and Mom and Dad had their own problems. All right? They were worried enough themselves, and they tried to hide their fear. But as children, you pick up fears. You pick it up, all right? And yeah, I would say it was a relief that we didn't have to be exposed to this daily harassment any longer. Mm-hmm. It felt good, believe it or not. But we realized, of course, that we had finished our education at this particular point. But the alternative wasn't too good either. So that was that.
So what did you do then?
Well, 1936 to about 1937, to the end of 1937, we, as citizens of the Rhineland, of this particular area where we lived, we had unlimited passes to go to Belgium or to Holland. We could stop at a streetcar and go there, as I said earlier today. And my dad enrolled me in a private school in Holland, which was across the border in a little town called Voss, V-A-L-S. It was a private textile school, and like a textile high, and which was great. The teachers were all Dutch, and they were just a great bunch of teachers. You know, you came out from this Nazi mess, and you walked in there, and you were treated like a human being again, you know. And you were judged by your scholastical achievements and not by your racial achievements. And but then, at the end of 1937, I remember well when it was the day before Christmas, the Jews had to give up all our so-called crossing passports. That we not a German passport, was a permission to cross the border back and forth. But Jews had to surrender them all. That was the end of my school there. What did I do then? Actually, I didn't do anything. I was in my parents' store. I was the gopher for my dad. You know, but now I'm 18 years old. I was the gopher, and that was it.
Did you have problems with the Dutch language, or?
No, they taught, there was a school that was in German.
In German.
Yeah, it's a border town. Everything is in German.
Mm-hmm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
Like, German was the official language. Now, like in the town in Aachen where I come from, the German was the official language, but everybody spoke French because the area had always been under French domination, all right? So everybody, it was not taught in school as a language, by the way. You could take it up in school as a what do you call it, selective.
Mm-hmm.
You could pick up German, you could pick up French. You had the option in that school where I went to, they wouldn't teach you Latin. Most did, but this one did not. You had an option of Spanish, French, or English, okay? And I took French because I didn't want to struggle with English, and French, I spoke French. I had a bad writing vocabulary in French, which of course improves with that. But again, and the kids in Holland, they spoke Dutch and German fluently, and everything was the school operated in German. So the school books were in German, so that was, you know, it was made to order.
Mm-hmm.
Had my parents only had foresight, they would have taken me out of this Nazi mess at an earlier, and let me go to Holland to school. But no, this will pass, don't worry about it, you know.
Were there differences between your mother and father on that issue of keeping you in school or sending you to Holland?
I really don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't answer the question. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm. What was your grandmother's perception of all that was happening?
She couldn't believe it.
Mm-hmm.
She couldn't believe it.
Mm-hmm.
Scared to death. Scared to death. Worried about her two daughters. Her son had died earlier before he learned natural causes, and couldn't believe it. Just unbelievable. Worried about her grandchildren, worried about the children. Never about ourselves. Never about ourselves. But about the family. So.
You said earlier that your mother had been the one to push for you all to leave the country. At what point did she do that? Or did she start the paperwork to leave the country?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we needed, as you probably know, in order to come to the United States, you needed a number, a registration number. At that time, the American quota was 25,000 Germans, and we fell under the German quota. There was no such thing as a Jewish quota. We fell under the German quota, and 25,000 was the magic number that the United States would issue visas for Jews, for Germans. Now, at that time there were 500,000 German Jews living in Germany. At 25,000 a year, would have taken about 20 years, something like that, all right? And my mom recognized that. And my mom had, I know there were many, I wouldn't call it arguments, but many debates in our household, and also in my uncle's household, and every Jewish household. Should we apply or shouldn't we apply for a registration number? Okay? It was almost like during the Russian with the refuseniks, the era. People weren't sure if they will be harassed if they go and apply for a visa, for a number or not. You had to go in person to the American consulate to apply. And I would say in 1935, I don't know, 1935, 1936, my mom had finally persuaded my dad that the family should apply for a registration number at the American consulate. That was easier said than done, because at that time you had a guy in the State Department, Breckinridge Long, you may recall his name, who tried everything possible to make it impossible for us to register. You had to come personally to the American consulate. To us that meant living in Aachen, Stuttgart was like about a 6-hour train ride. Not with any cars to go, even worse. So now you had to stay overnight because you had one train going and one train coming, and you couldn't go into any hotels. You only could go into either stay with other Jewish families overnight, or stay in Jewish-owned hotels overnight, or stay at the temple overnight in the towns. Those were your three choices. So you now first had to find where can we stay overnight, right? And my parents, don't ask me how, but they found a family. And my brother was already in America, my grandmother, my mom and dad, and myself, the four of us. Well, the doors for the American consulate opened at 7 o'clock in the morning until 12. That was all the time. Again, Breckinridge Long made it so as to discourage as much as he could. We went by train, we got there like in the afternoon. Well, we had to wait until the next morning when we got there, and I believe it was like 5 o'clock in the morning. There was a line around the block. Needless to say, we didn't make it that day. It took us 3 days before we finally made it. And all they did, the American consulate, they took your name, your address, your age, your telephone number, or whatever else, and then they would give you a number. That's all that was involved. But they made it so miserable. And that was the number that you needed in order to be interviewed eventually for a visa. Eventually. So my mom had pushed my dad and finally convinced him, please do that for me. Please do that for me. And this conversation went on in many, many Jewish families, by the way. We weren't the only one. And again, that's where the Jewish women kept after their husbands to do this. And we finally did, and we finally got a number. But the number was never called because we were on the bottom of, okay, this went on, this number system went on for a couple of years already. So we finally were called in 1940 in England. But by that time, the Congress had changed the laws. And the laws were, the war had broken out with Germany, and all German quotas of people living in Germany were closed. So if you had a number and you lived abroad before America was involved, before Pearl Harbor, you had a chance, and we were lucky. We had that chance. Okay? So that's how it worked. But to answer your question, yes, Mom was very instrumental in getting us out. If it would have been up to my dad, nothing would have happened. Nothing would have happened. Nothing.
Ed, could you tell me about your experiences leading up to Kristallnacht and Kristallnacht itself?
Okay. Let me do some thinking. You've got to understand, Kristallnacht happened on the November 9th to 10th, 1938. What led to Kristallnacht? In the spring of 1938, the Nazis had started deporting all Jews of Polish descent who lived in Germany. and they didn't care if they were by now second or third generation in Germany. If their grandfather or great-grandfather had originally come from Poland, they were now deported. And that was the first time that the Nazis deported men and women and children regardless of their sex or age. These people were rounded up in the middle of the night and were told they could appeal the procedure which would follow deportation, but they never had a chance because before they do it, they were already on trains. And here, for the first time, incidentally, they did not use the famous or infamous cattle cars. They used regular railroad cars and deported these families to Poland, where they stayed for many a month in so-called no man's land between the border of Poland and Germany. Among those to be deported was a family with the name of Greenspan. Mr. Greenspan was born in Germany. His father came from Poland, and Mr. Greenspan had a furniture business in Hamburg, and he was doing rather well. He had two sons. One son was Herschel, but Herschel had escaped Hitler before the action which led to the deportation of Polish Jews. And Herschel had taken refuge in France. The Greenspans were deported with the other son, Ellie, and when they were in this no man's land, Mr. Greenspan wrote a letter to Herschel and said to Herschel, Herschel, we are in desperate need. We have no money, we haven't got this, we have no food. What can you do for us? Is there anything you can do for us to help us? And Herschel at the time was 18 years old. And Herschel, stupid kid, or destiny, who knows, thought that if he would get a gun and so Herschel had some money in his pocket, and Herschel went to a pawn shop in Paris and bought a gun. And with that gun he went to the German embassy and he asked to see the German ambassador. Of course he was denied to see the German ambassador, and they showed him to the third secretary of the German embassy, a fellow with the name of Ernst von Rath, who, by the way, as history has shown, was an anti-Nazi, Ernst von Rath. And Ernst von Rath was originally employed in some German office for the German foreign minister in Berlin. And when the Nazis found out that he wasn't quite their boy, they sent him to Paris as a punishment. Okay, that's how Ernst von Rath got in there. So he was shown to the third secretary, to Ernst von Rath, and he shot Ernst von Rath point blank. And the Nazis now made a hero. History has it that the Nazis had planned the Kristallnacht long in advance, but they were looking for a reason to come along where they could capitalize on to get the German populace riled up to do it. Well, Ernst von Rath, when he was shot, we Jews, and he was still alive then, we Jews knew something is going to happen. You know, our Jewish radar went up by now, because we had been so demoralized that anything like this happened, we knew the repercussions it would have. But we had no idea to the extent of the repercussions. Von Rath died during the night of the 8th to the 9th of November, and the German propaganda under Goebbels, who was the propaganda minister, went immediately to work. They played nothing on radio but army music, martial music. That's all you had here. You would hear all all the march and all the music going, and Goebbels speaking to the German people about the assassination, and the Jews would pay the price for it, and the Jews won't get away with this, and so we were just waiting, what is going to happen, all right? At that time, I had been in a little town about a 2-hour train ride from Aachen, a town called Krefeld, Krefeld, where I had cousins living. Now I have to take you back in order to get the permit from the Gestapo to leave your home, because no Jew at that point was allowed to leave their homes anymore without a strict permit from the Gestapo. We were not allowed. So what we did was we went to the Gestapo and told the Gestapo I was visiting family in Krefeld. I took the name down, I took the address down, and then I got a piece of paper with a stamp that I was allowed to take the train to go to Krefeld and stay with the family. So that part was legal, perfectly legal. During the night of the 9th to the 10th, to the 9th to the 10th, I don't remember anymore. Around midnight, we were still up, we were still listening to the radio. You had no television those days. We were still listening to the radio about Goebbels speaking, and all the Nazi big shots were speaking, about what happened, and it was Goebbels who was mostly speaking. Continuously he was speaking. At midnight we heard a tremendous noise outside. And I wanted to go outside, which was my luck, and investigate what was going on. And my cousin didn't want me to go out. She said, no, you stay here. God knows what goes on there. Well, hey, I'm 18 years old. The world is mine, all right? I don't care. I go out. Well, I went out, and they didn't live too far from the temple. Maybe about 5-minute walk, something like that. And I saw the temple burning. And man, I knew there was a problem. I knew it. But at that point, I only thought we were just burning down the temples, And I stood there for a while. It was very interesting, because the fire department wasn't there. There was only the Gestapo cars, the big black limousines of the Gestapo were standing there, but not a single fire engine was there. And I was wondering, are they going to score a fire, do something? So I must have been there maybe about half an hour, 3/4 of an hour, watching with hundreds of other people. And the usual, unfortunate German populace was enjoying it. They were really, truly enjoying it. As I have pictures here, somewhere, well, I'll come to them later, where I can actually see how the German populace enjoyed this. I don't know, in this part of, no, they're not in this part here. No, they're on the slides that I have. Okay, anyway, I walked back to my cousin, and as I walked in the house, she said to me, you better get out of here. And she was crying. And I said, Lilo, what happened? She said, the Gestapo was just here looking for you, because the Gestapo knew where I was. From Aachen, they had notified the Gestapo in Krefeld. That's how well organized this was, all right? And her husband had been arrested and taken out in his night clothes. And she was crying her head off. And no word, nothing was ever heard from him again. We never found out if they killed him in there or sent him to a country. Nobody ever found out. No one. I didn't know what to do. I'm 18 years old, by now I'm scared to death, to put it mildly. The Gestapo is looking for me. I knew that is trouble. So I went to the railroad station. I had money fortunately I had some money in my pocket. Fortunately, I went to the railroad station and I purchased a round-trip ticket from Krefeld to Aachen, which was about a 2-hour ride. And it was the longest 2 hours in my life that I ever spent. And as the train rolled through the German countryside, and it came to the small towns and larger towns, you could see the fires. But still, you didn't know what was going on, you know. It can't be all the temples, there were too many fires going. Well, we finally got to Aachen. I got off the train, and there was one pay telephone those days. It was all over the railroad station. And I called my mom. By now it's like 6 o'clock in the morning. And she says, "Where are you?" And I told her, and she says, "Don't come home. The Gestapo is looking for any male they can get their hands on. Besides, no Jew is allowed outside of their homes. So don't come home." What am I going to do? Okay. There was a big sign in the waiting hall of the railway station which says, "Jews not permitted." So I went and I found another train going like about an hour or two later back to Krefeld. So I took that train and went back to Krefeld. I was afraid to go to my cousin. I hung around the Krefeld railroad station. Also there too the sign said, "Jews entry forbidden." I bought another round-trip ticket, because it's the only way how you could buy a round-trip ticket. And I went back to Aachen. By now it's about 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, maybe lunchtime, I forgot. And I decided I'm not going to call my mother because she's going to tell me the same thing. I'm going to go home. And as I came home, well, nothing had happened at home at that point, except that my parents were, the store was closed, my father's store closed, I don't know, and that they were shaking, really shaking. And I got home, my grandmother was there, and the decree from the mayor of the town, who was also the head of the Gestapo, was that no Jew was allowed to be in the streets until further notice. They're not allowed to be outside, curfew. So, about 10 o'clock at night, 9:30 at night, maybe 9 o'clock at night, I don't know. All of a sudden we heard the windows cracking. And we could hear this sledgehammer hitting the windows. And man, the noise, I will never forget if I live to be 150 years old. If I live as long as Methuselah, I will never forget that noise it made. Then they threw stones on the first floor of windows where they threw stones through there. Smashed everything that you could think of, right? And they left after they'd done this beautiful deed. They left. By the way, I have a picture here of my parents' house, the store here, so you can get a little bit, I don't know if you can see this from here. This picture here was the store, and here the windows, which were all smashed in, and here the windows on the upper floor, which were all smashed in. So, these are my parents and I. We just sat in the kitchen, which was protected from the walls, and didn't know what to do. You know, we were paralyzed, in plain English. But we knew, hey, you better don't go out because you either get shot or something like this. And we were still up about midnight, maybe shortly after midnight. There was a knock on the door, this one door there. And my dad said, "That's the Gestapo." At that point, we had no idea they were arresting people. And the Gestapo came in. There were 4 Gestapo agents. And I was standing next to my father. He didn't ask me who I was because I wasn't on the list. I was on the Krefeld list. That's how fortunate for me how stupid they were, right? I was in the Krefeld list, I wasn't on, and the German bureaucrats, hey, he's not on our list, we don't even want to take him. Huh? asked my father, "Where's your gun?" My father said, "I have no gun." As a Jew, if you had a gun, it was a death sentence. "We don't believe you." Dad said, "Hey, we will search your house." Dad said, "Be my guest, search the house. We have no gun." Well, you four stay here in the kitchen. One Gestapo agent stood with us. One stood on the outside so we couldn't escape. And two proceeded to go through the house. They destroyed everything that could be destroyed. In those days, we had feather beds. Down, is that what they call it, down feathers? And the mattresses were feather. They had bayonets as bombs. They cut the pillows, the feathers were flying, the mattresses, they were looking for weapons. They went in the closet, they took all our clothes they took, and threw it in one big pile. I didn't do anything, just threw it in one big pile. My parents had some very beautiful paintings. With the bayonet, they went to cut up the paintings, destroyed it, okay? Then they went down to my father's office. Oh, yeah, then they got into the kitchen. And they told us to go into my father's office with this one SS guy. We went to my father's office, which was down there. And they went in the kitchen. And they were looking for guns in the kitchen. They went to the kitchen cupboard, they took all the china out on the floor. Everything, a million pieces. Every saucer, every cup, everything went on the floor. Right? Then they said, okay, well, we didn't find any guns. You are very, very fortunate. However, you are under arrest, said to my father. We have to take you in because we have to protect you from your German neighbors. Your German neighbors might kill you for what your people did in Paris. Those were the words. And I'm there, and nobody, hey, I was not a German master. So well organized, right? Well. They had all my father's file cabinets, the paper. I will never forget that side. Everything thrown on one big pile, which you could never reconstruct after this. It was impossible. And one of them was smoking a cigarette. And as they were leaving, they said, "Does nobody dare to get up. You all stay where you are." And it was November, it was cold. And my father asked if he could take a jacket with him, a coat. And I said, "No. Where you go, you don't need a coat anymore." Those were his words. You don't need a coat anymore where you go. Out. And as they went out, one of them threw the burning cigarette on top of the paper. And my grandmother, who had cataracts, who was almost blind, saved us. She went in there, stamped them out. We were all paralyzed except her. She went in there and stamped out the smoke. The whole thing would have gone up in smoke in no time at all, which was the general idea. Right. So, many years, well, what they did then, they took then the Jewish men and marched them through town and took them to the concentration camps, and through a German professor with whom I'm very friendly, found later on pictures that were taken by the Gestapo, which were in the house of one of his students, his professor's students. And the caption of this is now I don't know exactly if my father's in this line, but it was taken in my hometown in Aachen, with a newspaper photo taken on November 10th, 1938, and shows the Jewish men taken by the SS to the railroad station in Aachen to be transported to the Buchenwald concentration camp. Now, this is one of them, and I couldn't point out which one. My father was in this group that was taken, and they had a sign here and said, "We are Jews and we get our punishment." Right? This picture I donated to the Holocaust Museum, and the Holocaust Museum put it in one of the books, and It's on display at the Holocaust Museum, by the way, this picture here. Well, we have no idea what happened to my father. No idea at all. So finally, my mother was told by the Gestapo to come down to Gestapo headquarters. And needless to say, she was shaken, my grandmother was shaken, and I was shaken. I wanted to go with her, and she wouldn't. No way. So she went to Gestapo headquarters, and the Gestapo, that's like 3 or 4 weeks later. We had no idea where. And my mother goes down to the Gestapo headquarters, and they said, "Do you know where your husband is?" My mother says, "No, how should I know?" "Well, your husband is in the Buchenwald concentration camp." "Do you want to see your husband again?" That was the line of questioning. And so my mother said, "Yes." They said, "Okay, but we prepared here, we need your signature." Everything my parents owned, the house, the business, the bank accounts, the money, the car, everything became the property of the NSDAP, the Nazi party, not the German government, the Nazi party. Everything became their property. If you sign this, we let your husband out. So without question, what would any wife do? Signed. Okay? And then, after she signed, they said, there's one stipulation. Once your husband comes out, you got 30 days, by which time you have to leave Germany. You understand this? My mother said, "Yes, I understand this." Okay. So she comes home, and she writes a postcard to my father. And she writes the postcard an Julius Voss, Buchenwald, Weimar concentration camp. Can you see it? And the postcard comes back, and it has the stamp up here, which says, "Prisoner is not allowed to receive any mail." And they send it back. Well, 2 or 3 days later, Gestapo came to the house and took inventory, whatever was there, whatever hadn't been smashed up, and they said, "Okay, we will release your husband, but not so quickly, baby. First we want to see that you have legitimate exit visas to leave Germany. And B, we gotta see which mode of transportation you have." So, fortunately, my dad had a sister who lived in Belgium, and her husband was very much involved with the underground. He was a Belgian citizen, and the sister, they were married long before the First World War. And my mom called them up on the telephone, and you had to be very careful what you say. You couldn't say what you wanted, and just told them that my father was very, very sick, and that he wanted to see his sister and his brother-in-law. Fortunately, they understood, but they had heard what was going on, of course. And they came, they lived in Brussels, which was like about an hour and a half, 2 hours by train. They came right away, and they had no problem. They were Belgian citizens, and the Germans were only too glad. And they came, and we had passports, of course. And they took, the passports had the J, for Jew, which was not the German idea, by the way, which was the Swiss idea, because they didn't want Jews to come to Switzerland. So they made the Jews wherever the Germans make a J in there. So my uncle took the passport and went to the Cuban embassy. He had, through the underground, a connection with the first secretary of the Cuban embassy. And there was no money involved. These people would not take a penny. And he gave us 4 visas to get to Cuba, except that they were forged visas. From the look at it, they were the real visas, that the Cuban stamps on there, all in Spanish, the Cuban seal, but they were not registered of some sort as be a legitimate visa. But the Gestapo wasn't smart enough to know this because it's from the underground. So my mom went with the visa to the Gestapo and said, okay, we got exit visas, we can now go to Cuba. And the German said, fine, how about shipping? How do you go there? By bus? And I said, no. Well, we allow from your money that we have confiscated enough for 4 tickets on the ship from Germany, from Hamburg, to go to Cuba. Well, now we had another problem, because as you know, the story of the St. Louis was well known, and when the Nazis, when the Gestapo said this to my mother knew, hey, this is going to be big trouble. But she was smart. As I said, she rose like a hero. And she said to the Gestapo, you know, gentlemen, I have a request. I got an 80-year-old mother who is blind. Why can't we leave from Antwerp, from Belgium? At least it would make it easier on her. And the Gestapo went into huddle to 2 or 3 guys and came back and said, okay, you can leave from Hamburg. But you've got to get the tickets. Get the tickets. Well, at least the money to buy with the Hamburg America line, the tickets to go to Havana from Antwerp. And now we had a new problem. In order to get to Antwerp, we had to have a visa, a transit visa, from the Belgian government that we were allowed to go to Antwerp to catch the boat. And my mom went to the Belgian consulate, which was in Aachen, and she told them that we need a transit visa, but we like to have it extended instead of for 3 days. They usually gave the visa for 3 days, for a week, because my uncle lived there, and my father wants to see his sister, and 3 days. And the Belgian consulate said, they knew what was up. They knew what was up. They said, well, we give you a visa for 6 weeks. Okay? My mom said, well, thank you. You know, God bless you. And hocus pocus, this is fantastic. Well, my father refused to leave. They finally released my father to Gestapo. And here in the document, which is almost unbelievable to get, it's backdated. Can you get this? It's backdated to November 27th, 1938. Backdated. And it says here, translated into English, it says, Dad's discharge paper from the Buchenwald concentration camp. Note the various dates. Buchenwald issued November 27, 1938. Arrested 11th of November 1938. According to this, Dad was only in the concentration camp for 18 days, right? Maloney. Released by order of the Gestapo, November 24, 1938. However, Dad was not returned until February 15, 1939. This date does not show on his discharge paper, because they didn't want to show how brutal they were, so they kept him there all that time, so they backdated the information. All right? So here we are now. He comes back in February, March, 6 o'clock in the morning, doorbell rings, over what's left of the door and bell, and here's the Gestapo. And they showed my mother her signature. You said you'd be out of Germany within 30 days. We discharged your husband in November. You are still here. You lied to us. You got one option, or rather you have 2 options. One is get out of Germany and we give you to the end of April, or all of you will go to Buchenwald. So our next visit here, if you are still here, is a one-way trip to Buchenwald. And with that they left. And you know what my father said? Baloney. I don't believe them. Can you believe this? Can you believe this? That was my dad's reaction. After he came back from Buchenwald with his hair shaved off, had lost half his weight that he had before he went. There's a picture of what Dad looked like. His hair shorn off. What he went through there, only God knows, and he still said baloney. I don't believe it. But my mom prevailed. She prevailed. And we left 10 days before the deadline on the 20th of April 1939, which was only a couple of months before the war broke out. We finally left Germany. When we got to the railroad station, and we were all strip searched, each and every one of us. Okay. And finally, they let us go, and we went across the border. We got to my uncle and aunt, and they had a little cottage on the Belgian coast. And they put us up in a little cottage there, and there was a reason for it, because the mayor of the town was a town called Knorke on the Belgian coast. The mayor of the town was part of the underground, and my uncle and my aunt knew. And he extended the Belgian visa, unlimited stay. The mayor of the town had the authority to do that. Right? However, my father and my mother felt very uneasy to stay at their little summer house. They felt it was an imposition to stay there, and it was a small cottage. And no, that was not for them. No. It was imposition, and we had no money. We were living on their handouts. So my mom wrote another letter to the uncle in San Francisco, whose sister was my mom's mother, and said, hey, can you get us out? We understand that there's a possibility that we can go to England if a security deposit is deposited in any American bank or England's bank, that we don't become a burden on the British. And he said, sure. And he deposited whatever money the brothers could get together and deposited it with the bank, Barclay Bank of England, and in our names as a security deposit. And the British gave us a visa to go to England. And we left England, we left Belgium. That becomes very interesting now. We left Belgium on the 25th of August in 1940. On the 1st of September, the war broke out, and we would have never gotten out of there. We would have become the victims of the Nazis a second time. So we escaped to England. As soon as we were in England, we went to the American Embassy and we registered with the American Embassy. And they said, your number is almost up. You gotta have some patience. My passport, it's an interesting story. My German passport had expired. My passport had expired on the 10th of August 1939. Yeah. All right. But the American consul said, you better go to the German consulate and get your passport extended. And my passport at that point read Alfred Voss, VOSS. And I went to the German consulate, and he said, well, first of all, we have to add the word Israel. That was the kicker to it. And certainly we expand your passport. No problem, you know. I was amazed how nice they were, you know. Got it extended, there's the extension, it's a swastika extended. 2 days later, I got a registered letter from the German embassy in London. You are report to the German embassy without fail to be returned to Germany for duty in the German army. And I called, that's not a joke, that's the truth. I called up the German consulate, I said, I got your letter, and I'll tell you what, go ahead and start the war, but without me. That's what I did. We finally got our visas, American visas, and we left on the 2nd of May, 1940. We left England to come to the United States. 5 days later, 3 days later, on the 8th of May, the Germans invaded the lowland, Belgium, Holland, Luxembourg, on the 8th of May, 1939. And if we wouldn't have been escaped for the second time, we certainly would have been caught in the web. So I survived. And here I am.
What were your feelings towards your father when he refused to leave after having been in Buchenwald?
Angry.
Yeah?
Angry. How can you? But you had respect for your father. You wouldn't say, how stupid can you be, you know? But you said, hey, Dad, don't you see what's happening? Quiet. Nothing's going to happen. The old German man ruled the house. He ruled the roost. Huh? I am the boss here.
Was your father concerned about starting up a new career after he left?
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. My parents didn't know. Oh, God, this was the biggest problem. I think that was the problem, besides being not believing. The problem was, hey, what am I going to do there? I don't speak the language. What am I going to do there?
Mm-hmm. What about your recollections of how non-Jews behaved during Kristallnacht itself and in the months that followed?
It all depends. It all depends. Again, depending where you lived. As I pointed out to you before, we lived in a strictly Catholic area of Germany. My mom and my parents, and especially my grandmother, was extremely well liked. And we were not allowed to go to any food stores. And yet, a number of our neighbors at nighttime endangered themselves, brought us food packages to the door so that we could eat. Packages that kept us alive. Okay.
What was it like to be living in Belgium and then England and eventually the United States? There was a lot of transition there. How did you deal with that?
Well, we lived in Belgium, as I said, in a little cottage, which was really only 2 bedrooms and a little kitchen. Eat kitchen, but it wasn't a seashore, you know, it was nice. So, you know, you're 18 years old, you're 19 years old, you know, you don't worry about it, your father, let your mother worry about that. Where they get the money from, they lived on what the family sent from America to Belgium to live on, to eat and drink on. That's where they lived on, okay? But they had made arrangements for us. We lived in a furnished room. All four of us, we had 2 bedrooms and a kitchen that we shared with a boarding house in the time that we shared with about 5 other families. And waited all the time out until we could finally get on a ship in England and come to the States, to travel to Liverpool.
When you are in England, in Belgium, or in the United States, did you face any discrimination?
No, none at all. None.
And what about language barriers?
Well, I studied while I was in England, of course, I studied English. And I went to a public school there, which was designed for foreigners to take English courses, which I did. It was free of charge, no problem. And that's where I began to learn a little bit of English. And when I came to New York, I spoke enough English to survive. And then, of course, 2 years later, I was in the U.S. Army, and I was thrown to the wolves, so to say, you know.
So you didn't know that much English when you joined the Army, when you were drafted?
I wasn't that fluent, no.
Mm-hmm.
No. I wasn't fluent with the American customs, for instance. I was like a fish out of water.
Mm-hmm.
But again, you're young and you adapt very easily, and I adapted very easily, and I wound up as a tech sergeant, which is they call Sergeant First Class in the United States Armed Forces, and was decorated. I participated in the liberation of Paris. I participated in I wouldn't call it the liberation of Frankfurt, Germany, but of the occupation. And after the war, I stayed with military government. Then I was assigned. Well, then VE Day came along, and J Day came along with Japan surrendering, and we were discharged by points that we had collected in the army, and I had enough points from combat and what have you to be released immediately. But I was frozen. I was frozen in this military government because I spoke German, and I was assigned as an interpreter to General Tom Larkin as his interpreter. Wherever he went, I had to go with him. I was they used to call me the shadow. So whenever he met with German officials, city officials, I had to be there, which was very, very interesting. And he was a heck of a nice guy. He was the sweetest guy that you would ever meet. And that was about it, you know. And then in 1946, my mom came down with cancer, and my father went to the American Red Cross, and my mom wanted to see me. And my dad went to the American Red Cross and asked for an emergency furlough, and I had no idea what had happened. And I was called to my commanding officer's office with Major Kearns, who told me that General Larkin wanted to see me, but he wanted to prepare me that there was a serious problem in the family, but my mother was very sick. So he wanted to prepare me before I would see General Larkin. And I went into General Larkin, I reported to him, and he said to me, "Sergeant, I got bad news for you and I got good news for you." He said, "Let me cover the bad news first." He said, American Red Cross had asked for us to grant an emergency furlough because he didn't tell me my mom had cancer, because your mom is very, very sick and she wants to see you. And the good news are that I have recommended you be discharged from the service because all the credits that you have. So you get your things together and we put you on the next transport back to the States. And well, they shipped me from there to Frankfurt, from Frankfurt to Antwerp, and the next troop ship that left to the US I was on, and came back home about 10 days later, and we went to Camp Upton in New York, and I was given a 30-day emergency furlough, and I went home and thank God my mom survived. She survived. And while I was in Camp Upton, after the 30 days I reported back, and the officer in charge of paperwork said to me, you know, you have been discharged. What are you doing here? I don't know anything about it. I said, yeah, you've been discharged. And he gave me my discharge papers, and I turned around and went home.
What did your parents do when they arrived in the United States?
Well, my mom got a job in the cottage industry, which was making hairnets for women. Which was a cottage industry in New York. And they got paid by how many pounds of those hairnets they could make. And she worked with those hairnets, and my father helped her day and night to make a couple of dollars. Day and night. Next to nothing. And then one of the neighbors, we lived in a big apartment house, one of the neighbors worked for a big clothing company in New York. And well, a war was on, men were being drafted, and there was a shortage on men, and they were looking for people to work in stockroom, where you didn't need a language. All you had to do is carry the fabric from the stockroom to the cutters. They were making uniforms. They were involved in U.S. Army uniform making, and my dad got a job there in the stockroom, carrying the. Dad was an accountant. He was a CPA. And he had taken the CPA license in Germany long before the war. So, well, of course, long before the war. But that's what he wanted. And worked there with this company until I came home from the service in 1946. 1946, Ilse and I got married. And in 1950, my brother had asked my dad, my brother was a CPA as well, and he had his own CPA office, and he was having problems with personnel trying to get, he lived in that office for 24 hours a day, and my sister-in-law was getting fed up, you know, she never saw him, so he said, you know what, I asked Dad to come here, so my dad and Mom left in 1950, and went to San Francisco, and Dad worked for my brother, not my brother worked for my dad worked for my brother, and Dad went for his CPA license in California and passed the first time around, which was almost unheard of those days, okay? My brother, who had graduated from the University of California, flung twice before he, so it was unheard of, all right? So they were very successful at a very nice accounting office, and Dad retired on his 80th birthday, and my brother kept on this business until he passed away in 10 years ago. So he died of cancer 10 years ago. So, and he has two children who didn't want anything to do with the business. One is in a dental business. He's not a dentist. He is make bridges and all this technician, I think they call him. And the younger one is in the restaurant business. He's manager. Right now, he's manager of the one of the cafeteria. I don't even know which one at the San Francisco airport. So that didn't have anything to do with the accounting business. Neither son.
Between 1941 and 1945, what was your perception of what was happening to the Jews in Europe?
That's a very good question. Nothing. I had absolutely no idea. I wanted to talk about that before, then I lost my thoughts on this. I would say in September, no, that's not true. April, May was VE Day. In early June, again, I was called by General Larkin, and I was assigned on temporary duty. And I had no idea what it was all about. He said, you know, we're going to have a displaced person camp, and I am General Larkin. He says, I have nothing else to do. He was the military commander of the city of Frankfurt. He said, I have nothing else to do. I'll never forget his words. He says, now they want me to be involved in running a displaced person camp. And I remember my words to him. I said, General, what is a displaced person camp? And he said, Fred, that beats the hell out of me. Those were his words. He says, from what I gather, there are people coming back from the concentration camps. And I said, oh. He said, well, the army has been, the American army is taking so many people, and we have to take care of their health, we have to take care of their clothing, and we have to process them. And since you speak German and French fluently, I had to give you up for a while, so pack your things and report to whatever lieutenant was, and he would take you to Offenbach, which was a little town outside of Frankfurt, and that's where we had the displaced person camp. He said, he will take you there, and at that time I was a tech sergeant. He said, and you will be the sergeant in charge. And I said, wonderful, big deal, you know. So he took me there, this lieutenant, who was the commanding officer of the displaced person camp, was the first lieutenant. Later he became a captain. And a day or two later, the first transports came in. And I couldn't imagine what they were talking about. That's the first time that I heard about the atrocities. I couldn't believe it, what I heard. At first I thought these people were making up their stories, but they were, 99% were like walking skeletons, all right? And the army set up kitchens.
Fred, between 1941 and 1945, what was your perception of what was happening to Jews in Europe?
To be quite honest with you, there was no perception. We had no idea what was happening. The first inclination that I got was when in early June, or end of May or early June, I don't know exact the dates anymore, 65 years ago, I was called to General Larkin's office and told that he had to give me up as his interpreter for a time being, which he in his plea, I'm very, very sorry, but now I can do for you. Rather blah, 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 blah. You got the report, what the hell was it, Lieutenant Swindon, I think, whatever it was. You got the report to Lieutenant Swindon. I have now been put in charge, in addition to all my other duties, to run a displaced person camp. And I looked at him and said, General, sir, what is a displaced person camp? And his answer to me was, beats the hell out of me. Okay? He said, I think it has something to do with people who come out of concentration camps. He said, but I'm not sure. So he said, you go and see Swindon or something like that was his name. You see him, and he will take you to Offenbach, which was outside of Frankfurt. And it the camp consisted of an old army, German army camp that was there, which had, of course, been deactivated for the German army. And American GIs were in the camp, but they didn't run it as an army camp. I think what they had in mind originally run it as a prisoner of war camp, the army did, because it was huge. It was enough to hold several thousand people. So we went out there, he went out with me in his Jeep, and he made me a sergeant in charge. It was a big deal, right? Here you are, a 24-year-old kid, you're in charge of a big deal, you know. You have a 45 on there, the world is yours. Anyway, he took me out there, and there were a lot of GIs, And they had a lot of German prisoners preparing beds and barracks and cleaning up and painting. Inmates weren't there yet. And I had nothing to do with the preparation. And then we had a debriefing with Lieutenant Swindon. We had some people from UNRWA, that's right. UNRWA was the first forerunner of the United Nations, right? It was UNRWA. Just comes back to me, I forgot already. And they were there. There were blue uniforms, these guys. They were not military personnel. Some of them were from Sweden and some were from Norway. There were none of them were Americans, if I remember well. And we had a briefing with them, and they told us what our duties are. They said, well, we are here to help the people that come, and they told us what was going on in the concentration camps. We were maybe about 20 GIs, all non-commissioned officers, but we all spoke various languages. That's how some spoke Polish, some spoke Russian, you know, some spoke French, some whatever. There were enough languages, some spoke Yiddish, enough languages there that we were available, all right? That was the idea of it, I guess. And they said, well, the function of the American army is, when these people come in, we will, you, the American Medical Corps, will process them medically. You will check, we have nothing to do, I had nothing to do with that. They will check their weights, blah, 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 blah. And the American army sets up a kitchen for chow. Now, you guys are going to interview each and every one of them. And you take all the personal data. We have had computers those days. That would have been essential, right? And they had forms that they had, one of the old, I forgot already what they called it, was a drum, and they had was before the fax machines even. It used to be duplicating machines, they used to call it, couldn't think of the name. And they had made the copies of the duplicating machines, all right? And we had a group of German prisoners who would do all the dirty work, all right? And we had them working for us, and they did the dirty work on the copying machine and whatever. And we had to take all the personal data, you know, where they came from, their name, all the family, the names of their brothers, their sisters, do they know where they are, blah, 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 blah. At that point, we hadn't seen anybody yet. We were just being trained how to do it. These people from UNRWA was telling us. The first train comes in. I'll never forget that. We had to go down to the Offenbach railroad station. And the first train that came in, maybe about a couple hundred people. Men, women, and children. And they were like walking skeletons. A lot of them had their blue and white garbs on from the concentration camp. Some of them had liberated, quote unquote, liberated German civilian clothes and had worn it. And the first thing we did, they had signs out, German speaking, French speaking, Polish speaking, you know, we all had signs. And we would get the people and we would tell them, okay, we want you to know you got nothing to worry about. We had rehearsed speeches that they had given us, and blah, 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 blah. Everything was well organized. And you will first, tell them what's going to happen. You will first go, first of all, you will get a good meal, which was the first mistake. Then you will go for a medical examination, which was the second mistake. After the gas chambers, after the showers. Then you will get showers. And these people would crawl. And that's for the first time that I had heard what the showers meant. I had no idea. None. So anyway, we were super, super nice. We were not the Gestapo, we were not the SS, we had no weapons, we had nothing, right? And we treated them like human beings. Took them to the American mess hall, and they got sick. You have no idea. They served them a regular GI meal. I forgot what. But these people had not food. They got sick. You have no idea how sick they got. And that's when the medics realized what had happened. So the medics had a heck of a problem on their hands. It's the next groups that came in. And they weren't received that. They were received more slowly, build up their food. Anyway, my job was to interview them, as I said, and that's how we established data, who they were, where they were from, when were they arrested by the Nazis, which concentration camps, and that's all we did. We collected all the data. That's all that I was involved in. I was in charge of this particular team of 20 GIs, of this particular facet. I had nothing to do with the medical, nothing to do with any other function, just the interrogation part. The next thing we knew, we had a security problem. We had to rig up huge barbed wire fences around the camp because these people wanted to get into the town and take revenge on the German populace. We had a meeting. All of a sudden, we had to post MPs and run barbed wire. And that didn't go over too well. And we had to do it because some of them had escaped and had murdered some of the Germans. Physically murdered them. And that we couldn't permit to happen, right? And that became a major problem. But anyway, that is when I first heard what went on. I couldn't believe it.
What were your feelings as you were taking down this information?
Confused.
Yeah?
Confused. Something I was totally unprepared for. Also, they had given us a 20-second crash course, Mm-hmm. I said 20-second, man. But even so, it was a 20-second crash. Totally unprepared for.
Mm-hmm. Did it sink in later? What exactly?
Much later. Much later.
Yeah.
Much later.
What about your own family? You left many relatives behind. What about them?
First chance I had was to get a furlough to go to Brussels, where my uncle lived. I got a 3 or 4 day pass to go to Brussels, and they had returned. My uncle and aunt had escaped to Vichy, France, to Lyon, and had been taken refuge in a Catholic cloister where they were hidden. And after the war, they went back, and I found them in the apartment. I forgot how did I know that they were there. I can't remember this. I think either my parents had heard from them and had let me know. I don't remember this anymore. Mm-hmm. And I found my uncle there, and he had aged tremendously, and my aunt had aged tremendously. And then I got slowly, step by step, I got my father's other brother who had fled at the same time to Brussels as we did, got stuck there, and he was beaten to death by the Gestapo in Brussels. And all of a sudden, one after the other, you realized that the family had shrunk from the 50 people to maybe about 5 or 10.
Mm-hmm.
The others are gone. So that's the story. So, the funny part that I wanted to tell you before, the first transport that came in, first or second transport, I don't know where. Hey, I was a young guy, I was a soldier, I was 24 years old, and there were 2 girls came in. And I don't know if they were from France or from, and I interviewed them. I've forgotten where they came from. I think they spoke German, maybe they were German. And I interviewed them. And they were not sisters. And they were both together, and they were shook up yet, and it was the second day, and I told them, hey, we are nice to you, we love you, fine. And I don't know myself. Many years later, Ilse and I went in the Catskill Mountains to a motel. Now you know the rest already, right? And we were laid on a swimming pool, maybe about 6-7 years later. Much later, Cliff was already born. Cliff was born in 1951, so maybe 1952. We were laying on the swimming pool, and there's two girls laying. I said to Ilse, I know them. And she said, yeah, how famous were when every skirt walking around. I said, I know those girls. I don't know from where. They didn't look like they came out of a concentration camp anymore. And it bugged me, and it bugged me. So I finally got up, and I went over there, and I said, I've got to ask you guys a question. And they looked at me. I said, were you in a Nazi concentration camp? And the one girl says, so what are you trying to say to me? She became immediately belligerent, I said, you don't remember me, do you? And she said, no. I said, when you were in Offenbach? Yeah. The sergeant who interviewed you? And she got up and she fell out my arms. Isn't that a small world? Mm-hmm. And Ilse stood there and said, you were right. Yeah. That was a nice side.
What are your feelings towards Germans today?
Well, it's a different ballgame.
Mm-hmm.
If I see a German in my age group, I can't help but see him in SI uniform, an SS uniform, and in Gestapo. But if I see the young generation, it's a different generation. And I cannot hold the children responsible for their father's sins. And I do not believe in collective punishment. I really don't. Mm-hmm. I really don't. I don't believe it.
What were your feelings towards Germans in 1945?
Hostile.
Mm-hmm.
But so did every other GI.
Mm-hmm.
We had seen too many of our bodies being killed.
So it had more to do with your experience during the war.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Oh God, yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh God, yeah. A lot more to do. And the German populace in 1945 were some of them were very friendly towards us, some of them. But I would say 80% were hostile towards us. Mm-hmm. You went through the German cities, you never went alone, you always made sure you had your 45 on you, all right? Mm-hmm. Because you didn't know when you're going to get hit or don't get hit, or whatever. Well, by 1945, the French populace, believe it or not, were also hostile. By that time, the French were already Yankee go home, all right? We had already overstayed our welcome.
Do you have any last parting words of wisdom?
Parting words are, it's a very interesting question that you asked me. If I see today the conflict in the Middle East, my heart breaks, and I really mean this, for those victims of discrimination, be they the Palestinians or be they the Jews. I feel that as long as one person is being persecuted in this world, that we all have not learned a thing from the past. And that's why I am very active speaking out against the anti-gay movements, why I'm supporting the black movements, because I've learned that we're all human beings. I don't care which religion we have, or if we are black, white, green, or blue, we all have the same blood. If you prick my skin as a Jew, and I prick your skin as a Christian, I dare anyone to tell us which one is the Jewish blood or which one is the Christian blood. And I've made that experiment in the school one day. I almost got thrown out with ears. I did this honest to God. We had a couple of black kids. I was well rehearsed with the teacher because I told the teacher what I was about to do. We had the school nurse there, by the way. And we got one black volunteer and one white volunteer. And I had the kids coming up to show which one is from the black boy and from the white girl. I failed, 100%. That's not partying word. My partying word is be tolerant. That's why I just am very pleased the certificate I got. This was a great honor to me when I got it. May the world learn, and hopefully it will learn. I don't know if they ever will, but I'm hoping. And as long as we have hope, we shall survive. Now let's be tolerant to each other. We don't have to love each other, we don't have to kiss each other. Really. But we have to be tolerant. We've got to give the other person, right? I'm using Jesus' words. Don't do upon others, but we don't want them upon you. Alright? It's the wise word of Jesus. I accept it. That's all I can say.